You're watching HuffPost Live. I'm Caroline Moderesi-Tirani. The White House launched an anti-bullying campaign this week called Act to Change, which hopes to raise awareness about bullying, specifically amongst Asian American, Pacific Islander, Sikh, Muslim, LGBT and immigrant youth. And since October is National Bullying Prevention Month, there's no better time to discuss how we can empower kids and stop harmful behaviours. Well, joining me now to discuss are Grace Wong-Lynch, a blogger at Huppa Mama, Sophia Dickens, the founder of Equitainment, and joining me on set are Jasmeet Sidhu, a photographer and a journalist, and Malik Panchali, an actor and spokesperson for Act to Change. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us. And Malik, I'll start with you. So how did you get involved with this initiative?
Well, I'm actually serving on the President's Advisory Commission on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and we work in conjunction with the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And for me, it was just, I've always been interested in social work and public policy stuff, and this position came open on the commission, and I got nominated for it, and I went through a pretty intense background check kind of process. And
so we're vetting you.
There was a lot of vetting. It was,
something
it was
that
really
you
hard.
must be unfamiliar with.
I had to hide a lot of stuff. No, and so I've been on the commission for a little over a year. It was not this past May, but the May before that I got appointed by the president to serve on this commission, and we're tasked with improving the quality of lives of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in this country. And so when I got appointed to the commission, bullying prevention was something that was really important to me, just because I know what it's like to feel like an outsider when you're a kid. I know that the prevalence of bullying is really high. We see numbers like 1 out of 5 kids experiences bullying. Every 7 minutes a kid is bullied in school. You see rates of depression, suicide, dropout rates because of bullying. And we also know that in the Asian American community, when we have groups like the Sikh Coalition, for example, they do these studies, and they found that like 65% of turbaned Sikh American students in schools, I think the study was in California, were experiencing bullying. And there was a report done by the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund that found that 50% of Asian American students in New York City were experiencing bullying. And these numbers are really high, you know.
They're really high, and
Yeah.
I think that, as you say, I mean, you know, if that 1 in 5 figure, that means that it's more likely there's a higher percentage of people actually know someone who's being bullied. Even if you're not the one who's being bullied yourself, you probably know somebody who is.
Right.
And I know that you actually experienced bullying yourself. How did that manifest?
Yeah, I mean, you know, for me, it was not super overt in the way that I think some kids are experiencing constant physical abuse or threats. Or for me, it was sort of just this feeling of always feeling like a little bit of an outsider. You know, I was this kid with, like, I had braces and glasses and I had zits and I was smart, you know, and so I was often called a nerd, and I was left out of the things that the cool kids were doing and just made to feel different. I was gay, and growing up dealing with being gay in a conservative town, and went to a school where there were no out students, no out teachers, and I don't think I even knew that I was gay, but I think that other kids pick up on differences, and certainly got called names around that.
Which makes it even harder then to actually be able to have an inward conversation with yourself. If you're feeling like people are bombarding you all the time, you can't have that conversation with yourself.
Well, yeah, and 100. I mean, I think what happens in situations like that is that you, as a kid, I know I wanted so badly to fit in that it was like, well, if they're calling me this, then to be cool, I've got to be something else. And so it's constantly having to move away from being who you truly are. And so, like you say, it takes away from that conversation that you could have with yourself that actually says, you know what, I'm actually perfect the way I am, and my uniqueness will one day, and I think it has now, allow me to do some pretty awesome things. But as a kid, you start to move further and further away from that. And then I think being Indian American, you know, just being a brown person in a school that was largely white, having kids not understand cultural differences and think that they were something that you can make fun of, like making fun of Indian accents or the way my parents spoke, or food stuff or religion stuff, and as a kid feeling like you just have to laugh along because how else are you going to fit in? And
as you say, I think that some people think of bullying as, you know, being physically attacked or assaulted, but it's this sort of insidious drip bullying that happens throughout the day, and sort of people attacking you from all these different angles, which I think is so important to raise. You actually mentioned Sikhs, and I want to bring this video in because the White House initiative specifically addresses the Sikh community. And this is a very powerful video from the Sikh Coalition that raises awareness about what it's like for Sikh youth to be bullied. Take a listen.
Towelhead. Towelhead, come here. Are you wearing that towel because you're a terrorist?
And as Malik was saying, it's not action, it's words that can be just as powerful. Jasmeet, talk to us a little bit about that with the Sikh community. How insidious can it be sometimes, the sort of bullying that people receive just because they're Sikh?
I mean, this is an issue that's obviously close to my heart. I'm a proud member of the Sikh faith, and I know many people that are involved with the Sikh Coalition. I want to commend them, obviously, because if people don't know about the Sikh Coalition, they were a group that were formed on the night of September 11th in the wake of a lot of hate crimes against members of the Sikh community following the terrorist attacks. Actually, the first hate crime was a man that was murdered post 9/11 was a Sikh taxi driver. And this group has done an immense amount of work in terms of finding statistics about what's going on in this community. The Sikh community in the US is not that large. I think it's about 500,000 members. When you look at the statistics, amongst this group of 500,000 Sikhs in America, 50% of their youth has experienced some form of bullying. That's a very significant number. My own brother is, a proud turban-wearing Sikh, and he experienced bullying as well, post 9/11, pre 9/11. There was a lot of verbal bullying that I had to witness with him, and other members and friends that I've seen with them go through this pressure of getting their turbans called different names, the pressure to cut their hair, and it's very difficult sometimes.
Particularly when it's a family member, how do you process that when you're seeing your brother go through that, have to deal with that kind of bullying?
It's really complex because, bullying does happen among males and females, but certainly the Sikh men who choose to wear the turban and the beard, they're much more visible in the community, and I think it triggers a lot of, those with racist views to maybe come out and, bully them and say different things. So it was very hard for me on the sidelines as someone who can, maybe kind of sneak by with not having very visible articles of faith, to watch my brother sort of have to withstand, and his friends as well, withstand levels of bullying. So it was a very difficult thing for me to experience. And I would just like to say again, the work that they're doing, the Sikh Coalition, I think they've really, by pulling up these statistics, we're now finally seeing that it's such a huge problem. And it's coming out, I think the real trigger for our community was 2012 with the Oak Creek, Wisconsin attacks. For those of you who don't remember, a man entered a Sikh Gurdwara and killed 6 members of the Sikh faith. And I think that was really the big trigger in our community, that something needs to be done. Bullying, obviously that was way beyond bullying, but it's all connected, and I think there was a big onus on the community saying that this needs to stop, and I'm really proud of the initiatives that you guys are doing right now from the White House.
Yeah, I think this is a nice turning point in all of this, is that we're seeing more people talking about it, whether it be on social media or conversations like this, or even just conversations in people's homes. I think having the dialogue is going to help and go a long way in actually being able to end some of this bullying and this harmful behaviour. Grace, I want to bring you into the conversation because I know that as a mum of mixed race children, you have also witnessed a level of bullying that I think people might not realise actually goes on. Tell us about your story.
Sure. So a couple of years ago, my son brought up a conversation where he was describing how kids at school were doing the kind of taunts that East Asian kids get, where people pull their eyes and make sounds at them, or ask repeated questions about where are you from, are you Japanese, are you Chinese, things like that. And it was really surprising to me at the time, because I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. We think of ourselves as being in a very cosmopolitan area, and it's not like I grew up as a child in the Midwest years ago, and that kind of thing was very commonplace for me, and I wasn't expecting to see that. So I did write about it on my blog because I felt it was important for me to process it openly and publicly, because I know that if it's happening to my child, it's happening to other people's kids as well. And the response was overwhelming. I got so many comments on it, so many people coming out and telling me that a similar thing had happened to their child. And, to this day, every once in a while, I get emails from people who clearly they don't have any resources or any support to turn to, because they're emailing me asking for advice and telling me their stories. And some of them are really heartbreaking.
And I think that, the fact that you had that response and continue to do so says an awful lot about the way that our society still hasn't got over this idea of hate crimes, of bullying, and of hate speech. What do you tell your children now, Grace? I mean, when they come home, if they've ever experienced some kind of horrible remark or have been physically violated in some way because they look different, what do you say to them?
The first thing I've talked to some people who are experts in the bullying field, and, the first thing you want to do is empower your children. You want to, first of all, start off with them having a really strong sense of who they are and, that their differences are positives, that the way they look, their language, their religion, anything about themselves, that those differences are good things, and that when people try to turn those into bad things, that they should be aware that that's not, don't let other people tell you who you are, and then also to identify, help them work through, at what point do you have to consider that this is something that you need to take to a teacher, to a principal, and let them know that they have those options, because I think that was something for myself growing up, and for a lot of people who are my generation. We just didn't really even feel like we had the option, because maybe our parents were immigrants and they didn't really know how the American system worked, and they felt a little bit on the fringes of society. They didn't feel like they could go and speak up about it. So I want my kids to have that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Malik, when was there a turning point for you that you thought you were able to actually speak up and say, back off?
Yeah, I don't know that I had that point until I was an adult, to be honest. And I think that's part of the reason that doing a campaign like this is so important, because I think that what Grace said so well about teaching kids to celebrate that our differences are positives is so important, and I feel like when we look at this campaign, and you said this too, about building awareness, getting our communities talking about it, I think part of it is so that we can empower kids to speak up when they're having problems. We can empower other kids to help them. We can empower teachers to be more educated about cultural differences so that they can celebrate them. I mean, we hear stories where teachers themselves are not trusted adults that kids can go to because the teachers themselves don't understand the differences in culture, and that's a huge problem. And parents too. I think what Grace did for her children is so great, but a lot of parents don't understand the ramifications of bullying, and they don't understand, when a kid is called, like in that video, a towel head, or I think anecdotally we're hearing stories where parents are like, well, just study and don't worry about it. And the fact of the matter is, it's hard to study when you don't feel safe at school.
Well, and also that sense of, just study and don't worry about it, I think is almost a very mid-20th century, end of 20th century viewpoint before we all of a sudden had social media. And now, even if you're at home with your head down, you probably have a computer in front of you and social media in the background, whatever it might be, whatever program it might be. Jasmine, in terms of being able to combat that kind of bullying, where it comes from any method, any form of social media, what are the best ways to try and go about that?
Well, I think a lot of people equate social media as a very sort of positive, empowering tool, but we've seen that it's a double-edged sword. Going back to the issue that Indian Americans faced, you saw when the Scripps National Spelling Bee, two students of Indian heritage won the spelling bee. Immediately, it was almost expected at this point. You go into Twitter and you see all sorts of racist remarks at these two 12-year-olds who had accomplished a wonderful thing. A couple years ago, Miss America happened to be an Indian American, Nina Dubulari. Immediately after she won, I wanted a real Miss America. Like, what does that mean? All that racist spew coming out on Twitter and social media. But at the same time, social media can be a really great tool for really knocking down racist tropes that we've seen for a long time. For example, the Black Lives Matter movement has shown how incredibly powerful social media can be on the Democratic national debate. It was such a significant part of the conversation. And so social media can be a very effective tool. Another example, I don't know if you guys remember that the Muslim American who said that she received racist treatment on a United Airlines flight.
Absolutely.
Those are the kind of conversations and stories we would never hear about, in the 1990s, when people didn't have that platform to talk about, this racist incident happened to me, it happens to all of us, we need to do something about it. So that's a real powerful thing, is to tell your stories online.
Yeah, and telling your stories is something that actually college student Kevin Kerwick has been doing. He created an anti-bullying Twitter account. It's called ASIO Nice Things. Take a listen to this.
Hello, my name is Kevin Kerwick. A few years ago, I created a Twitter account named Asio Nice Things, which is designed to highlight the positive aspects of my high school as well as uplift those in it. I made this account in response to multiple Twitter accounts that were created to anonymously degrade and attack certain students at my high school. The response to Asio Nice Things was incredible and unexpected. Within just days, the anonymous Twitter accounts had shut down and deactivated. One of the greatest things I learned from this is the power of involving students in the process of combating bullying. The more engagement that we can get students to have in bullying, I believe the better outcomes that we will have and the greater buy-in we will have to the entire program.
What do you think about that, Malik?
I think it's awesome. Good for Kevin. I mean, it's so great. And I feel like it's such a great, like what you were saying about using social media, it's such a great tool that these kids can have to take a negative and make it positive. And, I think with the Act to Change campaign, hopefully we'll inspire other kids like Kevin to get out there and, post on social media, use the hashtag Act to Change, post pictures, and create a sense of community where people don't feel like they're alone in this and that they know that there's places they can turn to for help. So go, Kevin, you're amazing.
Yeah, exactly. We all agree with that sentiment for sure. Sophia, tell us a little bit about how adults can be a part of the solution in all of this too.
Well, I'm the founder of a company called EQtainment, and I'm a mom of 3 kids. And I wanted to create tools to make it easier for parents to teach kids social scenarios. And so, like Grace was talking about, she just wanted to empower her kids and teach them. So I wanted to provide that. And I think parents play a very important role because bullying is now happening at younger and younger ages. And most of bullying prevention that we see out there is really more about the aftermath of bullying and how it affects people, but we're not really getting at the root of it or kind of nipping it in the bud. And I think we need to do better. We need to start earlier. So I, for example, have a board game called Q's Race to the Top. And in playing that board game, I've gotten feedback from moms all over the country that have told me that, it's a great way to open communication channels with their kids. And they're seeing these early indicators. For every mom that I talk to that discovers that their child may be bullied, I talk to a mom who discovers that their child is speaking like a bully. And we need to help those parents too.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point as well because, the emotional ramifications for a parent who finds out that their child has come home and is crying because they've been bullied. And we very rarely talk about the parents that come home and realise that it's their child that's actually carrying out some of the bullying as well. Grace, talk to us a little bit about that sort of double-edged sword that if you're the parent in that camp, maybe there needs to be some cross-parent dialogue that goes on.
Yeah, I think that's a position where if you find out that your child is being the perpetrator of bullying, you have a really powerful position that you can influence that and stop it from happening. I think a lot of times kids emulate what they see either from their parents or on TV or anything. And, it's all of our jobs as parents, whether or not we're, Asian, East Asian or Muslim or Sikh or anything, even if your child is not being bullied or is being, bullying someone else. We have to set the example and also set limits of showing our kids, this is acceptable behavior and this is not acceptable behavior. And, for my children's school, we happen to be pretty lucky in that we actually have an anti-bullying campaign where parents come in once a month and, volunteer to read a story and lead a discussion. And, it feels a little after school, special like, but it does get that discussion out. And, sometimes you just have to start somewhere to begin the discussion, to give people the words of, what is a target? What is a perpetrator? What is, what is a stereotype? What are these words so that they can even begin to understand, oh, that's not okay.
Yeah, and Sophia, in terms of actually teaching the language to be able to discuss these kinds of things, I think we probably take it for granted that parents, that adults, know how to talk about these things with their children. Not always the case, is it? How should a parent start that conversation?
It's not always the case, and even parents who are great emotional coaches, they still need the tools to teach their kids. And when you have a game or a format that's actually fun for the kids and kind of breaks down the barriers, they're much more willing to open up and they're more willing to talk about their feelings. So first you have to give your kids an ability to identify their emotions and give them vocabulary to describe what they're feeling and what they're afraid of. And then you want to talk about social scenarios, what to do if a bully approaches you? When is it okay to tell an adult? When should you keep a secret, and when should you not? And I think those are issues that don't necessarily come up when you're just driving along in the car, and that's why I wanted to create these tools to make it fun and easy for parents.
Well, this is certainly a conversation that is getting a lot of you that are watching really galvanized. I've got a comment here from Liz Von Notius who says, children don't have the same language skills as adults. They need adults to model behavior to them. Also, kids generally don't have a choice about being in school, while adults have a choice about being online and being trolls. Malik, when it comes to actually modeling the behavior we want our children to emulate, how much of a role do we have?
I think a huge role. Something that Grace said that I thought was really great, was she said the perpetrator and the target, the child who's perpetrating the bullying, because I think to call a child a bully is not fair, because I think the kid learned it from somewhere. I think that it can be changed. I think we can educate and then inform kids. We can help them better situations. So I think that we have a huge role to play in that. And I think, particularly with a campaign that we've created that includes the Asian American and Pacific Islander community in a significant way, I think cultural sensitivity, education about celebrating differences, education about things like what it means to wear a turban, why they wear a turban, how the Sikh faith is not the same background that attacked the United States on 9/11, and so to call a Sikh child Osama because he's wearing a turban, how that's not actually, that doesn't actually make sense. We can educate about these things, and I think through education we can get kids to change their behavior and not classify a bully as someone who's a bully and that's it.
Yeah, and I think that idea of education, it doesn't have to necessarily be in a classroom, does it? I mean, if you think about culture, for example, Gap, I don't know if you guys remember this advert with Sikh model Waris Alwalia. I think that made such a splash, but the sad thing, as you can see from this headline from the Huffington Post, the ads were defaced with racist graffiti. And then all of a sudden the company came out in force. I think a lot of people, you guys out there on social media, also came out in force. Jasmine, when it comes to cultural shifts, how important is that when we're talking about education around bullying?
It's hugely important. We're seeing so many changes happening in television right now, and we see how the different communities that are now being represented in television appreciate being seen as complex characters and members of this American fabric of society. We've seen it even just simply with Scandal. Having an African-American actress, be the head of a television show. Quite recently, Priyanka Chopra, I think, is the first Indian-American who's headlining a television show as well. Members of those communities appreciate so much of just being seen kind of as a regular person going through complex plot storylines. They're no longer just the sassy black nurse. That's how it used to be, in the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah, actually, it's a really good point. Malik, in terms of the likes of Priyanka Chopra, I mean, how much of a game changer is it when you see the images of Indian Americans emblazoned, with lights around them and celebrated like that?
I think it's huge. I mean, when I first started acting in this industry, some of the first parts that I would have to audition for were, and some of the first parts that I did, I was wearing a turban and doing an accent, and I was like the foreign exchange student, who was weird because he was foreign. It was like, oh, look at the weird way he dresses and the weird things he's eating. Literally, I did an episode of a TV show where it was like everything was made fun of. My girlfriend was wearing a burqa. I was wearing a turban. I had incense burning in the room. There was food, and I would never do that now.
Why did you do it back then, though? That's interesting. Why back then did you feel
because
like
there wasn't anything available for people like me on television. I mean, when I grew up, I didn't see, I don't think really anyone who looked like me on television, and I wanted to be an actor. And I kind of actually forgot that was going to be an issue, because I went to school and I got to study great plays and be on stage, and I thought I'm just going to get out in the real world and get to continue to do great parts. And instead, the only parts that were available for brown people were generally stereotypical and perpetuated, I think, these cultural insensitivities. And so, it got my foot in the door, and it got me, some tape to show around and show to people that I could do comedy, but it's not something that I would continue to do. And now, I'm playing, I think it's the first lead Indian American character on a network cartoon. I play Sanjay on Nickelodeon's Sanjay and Craig, and to me that's incredibly important, because I remember what it was like being a kid and turning on the TV and not seeing anyone who represented who I was. And granted, this is a cartoon character and not a real person, but he is a real person, and he's a kid. He's a 12-year-old kid who happens to be Indian American with an Indian dad and a Caucasian mom, and he's just like any other 12-year-old kid.
Right.
And that's so important.
Yeah,
I think the more stories where we can tell where it's like, this is this person, and they just happen to be X, Indian American, Asian American, the more stories and the more imagery like that we can push into the world, I think is really great.
Yeah,
and not to erase culture, not to say like the culture's not important, but to say we don't have to make those differences things to divide us.
Well, and there are so many shades of grey within a culture as well. I mean, you can share the same culture as somebody else, but the way that you practice that culture, the way that culture influenced your upbringing could be totally different. So I think you're absolutely right. Grace, for you, in terms of being able to see people and for your kids to see people that look like them on screen or on the computer, whatever it might be, how important do you think that is for education purposes?
Oh, it's really important. I mean, I think it just is like Malik said, it's something that makes you feel like, oh, the stories of people like me are valid and important, and they can be relevant to other people. And I think in the last year we've seen shows such as Fresh Off the Boat or Dr. Ken come on TV, and and my family watches them because it's important. It's exciting to see people who are more similar to us than other characters that we've seen before, and of course we want to see things that are entertaining too, but we want to see the culture that is similar to us and people going through situations that are relatable to us happening in a network program.
Absolutely. I mean, I've got to say, guys, we've had so much response from this conversation. Charles T. Franklin on Twitter says we have to address bullying in a micro sense, that's through school, and a macro sense, that's US culture. I've got a comment here from Zev Hadash, who's watching, who says, I didn't receive much bullying from outside my community until I came out as gay. I did experience a lot from within the Jewish community because I don't look Jewish enough, whatever looking Jewish enough means. I mean, awful. But Zev, thanks for your comment. And Brian Penny says, this bullying continues into adulthood. Nobody can speak online without being trolled. I think that's a really good point as well. Malik, final thought from you. How important do you think that this initiative is, and where would you like to see it going?
Oh my gosh, I think it's hugely important. I think just from all the responses that you said you're getting on Twitter and stuff, I think clearly it's something that people want to be talking about. And for me, with this White House initiative, it's the culmination of a lot of work, it's the culmination of a lot of research, it's a culmination of listening sessions we did around the country, but it's also a starting point for stuff that we want to continue going forward with. We want to continue having conversations. I would encourage people, just to give a last plug for the campaign, to please go check out acttochange.org, to please use the hashtag #ActToChange, get people talking about the very thing that we've been talking about for the last half hour. And for us, and I know everyone at the White House, we're going to continue to build on this initiative as long as we're around.
Fantastic. Well, I'm so glad you are, and I'm so glad for you all to have come in today and actually start this conversation here. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me, Malik, Jasmine, Grace, and Sophia. And guys, thank you all very much as well for participating in this conversation. We'll continue this dialogue. As Malik was saying, go to Act to Change and check out the links in our resource well below to find out more about this initiative. And stick around, Alex Miranda is up next with Tiki Barber.